Hello and welcome to this edition of Inside Tacoma. I'm your host, Randall Lewis. Our guest for our conversation today, Pierce County Auditor Julie Anderson. Welcome back.
Thanks, Randy.
Thought it would be great to have you here after an election because this was a particularly busy off year for you.
It was. It looks like the biggest turnout since the Vietnam War.
Wow.
Not something that we expected in this midterm, and blew 2014 away. And the number of ballots counted approaching presidential election levels.
That is amazing, and I guess that's
wonderful.
Some credit to the political climate in our country that people were that motivated to vote in a time when they frequently don't.
People activated, and I'm hoping that it's a trend that has some staying power, and looking forward to more of it. It's really an awesome election. The voters that came to visit us on Election Day and the day before, looking for replacement ballots, checking on their voter registration status, just in a really good mood, kind to each other, really well behaved, excited. It was a great election day.
Wow. And then there's a lot of details, and certainly we're seeing stories play out in other parts of the country that I want to contrast to Washington State. And I get your take on why that is the case. Washington is all vote by mail, that nobody goes to a polling place anymore in Washington State. That was traumatic for some folks, but we've kind of gotten through it.
Right.
And we've now added a new wrinkle to our vote by mail, which is the postage is free.
Right. So we actually have more modalities than you would think, Randy, but only election administrators really know all the ins and outs. We do have voting centers in the community where people can still come on Election Day and vote in person if they need to. They're basically extensions of our office at the auditor's office, where they can get replacement ballots, where they could vote on not vote on a touch screen, but use a touch screen to mark a paper ballot, et cetera. We have prepaid postage, and then we also have e-ballots in Washington State, which is that emergency option for people that lost their ballot on Election Day, can't figure out what to do. They can actually download a ballot, mark it, and mail it in to us. And of course, our military voters can do that and actually return it digitally, and we can use a digital signature for them. So there's actually lots of modalities, but yeah, pretty much, for 99% of the Washington State voters, it's vote by mail.
Right. It's not the old polling places we're in my neighborhood or anything like that we have.
It's centralized. I will agree. Yeah. I will agree on that. It is centralized, and in Pierce County, 100% paper. 100% paper. There is not a voting machine in Pierce County that actually collects and stores votes on it.
And that's an issue that we're seeing as part of the stories across the nation. There are states in the United States that have people vote on machines where there's no paper record. Even the old clunky voting machines
blows my mind
that people fought for years to keep in Pierce County.
Yeah.
We finally got rid of them. But the one thing they did do was they had a paper record.
You could always go back to paper. And it blows my mind that states would have direct recording equipment, that's what that's called, with no paper trail. In Washington, every single election, it's a publicly announced meeting. In attendance are political party observers. We have an election audit, and it's random. The political parties get to choose the race and the precincts. We pull out tabulated ballots, and then we compare the machine count of those ballots to a hand recount right in the middle of the election. And those states can't do that.
Right.
It blows my mind.
Yeah, it's just a matter of the confidence. People want to have confidence in their elections, and that's just a common sense approach.
Yes.
Somebody got sold some really glitzy tech at one point in time, but I'm not putting down technology, because you use a lot of technology.
We use a lot of
these
technology,
days.
But the point is, it's backed up by humans and paper, and there's always an audit trail. You can always backtrack to the voter's original intent and see a log of the voter's actions. So technology, great, but we're still very much a human paper-based election system, and that's the best of both worlds, right?
Right. And something, you mentioned just something about the political party observers who watched this process, but now you've done something kind of different than anybody else in Washington State has done, because Washington is one of those places where not everybody, in fact, a very small percentage of people classify themselves as Democrats or Republicans.
Yeah, so Washington state law ensures that county auditors open the election center to political party observers. The Democrats and the Republicans are the only two major political parties recognized right now. But for me, there was a huge number of people who aren't affiliated, myself included, aren't affiliated with either political party, who very much had an interest in what was happening on the election floor. So we struck a deal with the League of Women Voters to act as a political party, as you will. And if you want to be an observer, you enroll through them, come to our training, and you're an unaffiliated or independent political party observer. So now we have 3 sets of observers on the floor at all times, anytime we're handling voted ballots that aren't secured. And that's a lot of hours. We really appreciate the volunteerism. The party observers and the independent observers are unsung heroes. You know, we're not allowed to acknowledge them as volunteers because they're independent. They don't do what we tell them to do, so we can't give them awards for most valuable volunteer for Pierce County, but they're invaluable.
Right, and again, it's part of that integrity process, really, because it is someone who has an interest watching over the civil servants who work for the county.
And importantly, their interest isn't ours. They're not our friends. They're not our employees. That's one thing I changed when I became auditor. I stopped paying party observers because, to me, that didn't speak well of their independence. So they have their own interests, and it's the interests of the citizens and interests of the political parties, not our interests. We're friendly, but not friends.
Right. Now, there are still some quirky things about Washington law in terms of elections. I mean, you were telling me before the show the cost of the elections is pretty significant, and the state of Washington had the vast majority of the places on the ballot. I mean, we're talking about legislative seats. That occupied the vast majority of the seats of this election, and yet the state of Washington doesn't actually pay for that.
Right. A lot of people don't know how elections get paid for. And Washington State's election costs aren't any higher than any other states. Vote by mail is efficient, but it's about the same as it would be for polling places. But the way we pay for elections is we conduct the election and then we send out bills to everybody. So Bethel School District this election, they're getting a bill. The Pierce County Library, they're getting a bill. City of Tacoma is going to get a bill. Everybody's going to get a bill in this election except for the state of Washington. Now, in odd years, when they hardly have any cost, they pay the bill. But in the big years, when they have the majority of the cost, they skip the bill. What happens is the county's general fund has to eat their share of the costs. So we're not pushing the state costs off to Bethel and the Pierce County Library, but the Pierce County General Fund that pays for courts and prosecution and the sheriff's office and behavioral health and all that other stuff, they suck it up. And let me give you an example. In 2016, our last even year, the state skipped out on a $1.1 million bill and stuck it to the Pierce County General Fund. So we're going to be asking in the next legislative session, as we have before, for the state to treat itself just the same way it treats all other jurisdictions, and to just simply pay their fair share of election funding in even years, just like they do in odd years. Doesn't that sound fair?
That sounds fair. And if they were concerned about some county gouging them, they of course have the powers to check all of that kind of stuff.
Well, they don't even have to, because the state auditor's office has an entire BARS manual and a process, and so the way we charge election expenses is already well regulated, very transparent, and audited.
Now, one of the things the state had on the ballot this year, a lot of, besides legislative races, was initiatives to the people and to the legislature. And the turnout we had in this, because of Washington law, the turnout we had this year is going to affect future initiatives, isn't it?
Right. So anytime there is a petition process, either for the recall of an official or for a referendum or an initiative, there's always a certain number of signatures of valid, active, registered voters that they have to get. And that number is actually generated by the last year's regular election. So this general election, which in Pierce County we're expecting a 64-65% turnout, is going to be the bar that sets everything for the next year for local elections.
The signature gathering is going to be a lot higher and a lot harder next time around.
That's correct.
Okay, that's kind of one of the if you had a big idea for an initiative next year, that might be a downside to having this turnout of 60% in Pierce County.
Oh, well, Randy, there's no reason to not celebrate a big turnout, and I'm hoping that it's the new normal, but yeah.
Yeah, well, let's hope, because that certainly is the news of the week about that election. It was the turnout and the amazing turnout amount of certain classes of voters, young people who are frequently not active voters, but they turned out in great numbers, particularly in some states, more so than others probably. But we saw new voters or rarely seen voters turning out in this election.
Rarely seen. So a lot of people on election day were showing up because they were inactive voters in Pierce County, and they were presenting themselves and getting activated again. So
what is that process?
All they have to do is let us know where to find them. They just have to pick up the phone and say, I'm alive. I haven't been voting, and you haven't known where to send my ballot because I moved and forgot to tell you. That's the number one reason you're an inactive voter, is you get a job, you move, and you forget to tell us, and we end up sending you a ballot. It bounces back as undeliverable, and that gets you in an inactive state. But again, Washington State is so great. That doesn't mean you're purged. It doesn't mean you're canceled. It doesn't mean you lost your right to vote. It just means we couldn't find you to send you a ballot. Just pick up the phone, give us a call, and we will activate your registration right up until 8 p.m. on Election Day.
Wow. So that is I think I'm guessing that is kind of not uniform across the nation.
No, it wasn't. And we had a lot of people, actually some of the national news about inactive voters or undeliverable ballots getting voters canceled. Some of that noise from across the nation actually accelerated people in Washington State to check on their own registration and to question why they hadn't gotten a ballot. So I credit some of the bad news nationwide with some of the good reasons we had good turnout. But I would just urge people, as easy as we make it for voters to participate in Washington State, prepaid postage, ballots 18 days in advance, yada, yada, yada. The one thing that we ask of voters is please pay attention to your registration. And if you move, tell us, and don't wait until Election Day to tell us.
Okay,
Doesn't that sound fair?
That does sound fair and fairly easy to do. The other thing I want to ask about, though, is because one of the things you do when ballots get challenged or get set aside is because of problems with signatures.
That's right.
And my signature has changed over years. Mine doesn't look anything like when I registered to vote at 18 years ago.
Has your ballot ever been challenged?
No, my
Okay.
ballot's never been challenged.
Okay.
So it must look similar, but I can see the
Yes.
differences in it. But apparently, in some states, exact match is the rule.
Right.
And that just seems crazy on its face to me.
Sure.
And so I want you to talk about how do we match signatures? How do we verify that I'm really me if somebody were to say that doesn't look like it did when he was 18?
Okay. Well, first of all, we take our training. Anybody that's checking signatures at the election center is a professional employee and who's been trained in the last year by the Washington State Patrol Fraud Division in the art of signature verification.
So not you guys, not the Secretary of State, but actual law enforcement people.
Right,
do the training.
in signature verification. And, there are tips and tricks. I've taken the training, and they start the training with a pre-test. You go through the training and then a post-test, and it's an amazing training. And yeah, your signature, like mine over time has become truncated. It becomes shorter and shorter, but I can tell you that the signature loops and bends and orientations have not changed over time. So my signature looks different, but to a trained verifier, it's the same. But if you do end up getting challenged, if we say, it's changed so much, we're just not sure. And by the way, we may have several signatures on file for you, which may be, if we're able to match one of them on file, that may be why you're not getting challenged. But
Okay, so
If you
that's possible that people might have, there might be more than one there.
Yes, yeah.
Oh,
And
okay.
we always go through a first review and second review. So first review is just a really broad cut, and second review goes to people who are experts who also have access to other documents and other signatures on file. But if you do get challenged, in Washington State, we contact you as soon as we are unable to match your signature. We contact you by letter, and you have right up until the day before certification day. So this was a November 6th election. People with challenged ballots have until November 26th to cure the situation, and they don't even have to drive into the office. Along with that letter notifying you of the challenge, we have an affidavit right there inside where you provide documentation and a new signature, and if that matches, you're taken care of. By the way, if you don't check your mail, another thing I would ask voters to do, because the election isn't over on election day. If we send you a letter about a challenged ballot and you ignore it or don't open it, we're going to give you a phone call if you've provided a phone number. On the outside of that envelope, when you sign on election day, we provide a spot for your phone number. That phone number is shielded from public disclosure, and we do not share it with anybody, but we will use it to contact you if you haven't responded to our letter.
Now, and then there's one other thing that's kind of a big change that is coming to Washington State.
And I do want to say something for people in the viewing audience who are going, I wonder how many ballots don't get counted. It ranges between 1% to 1.5% of ballots that get rejected because of signature issues. Much smaller than votes that don't get counted in other states because people don't turn up on time at the right place or have voter registration problems. So the rejection rate in Washington State is quite low. We're always striving to get it lower, but it's quite small.
Okay, well, that's good to know. And the question about a change in policy that's coming into Washington State in 2019, which is going to have some impact on your office and your colleagues in the other 38 counties,
Sure.
is voter registration up to Election Day.
Right, so it's called same-day registration. I call it Election Day registration because I know voters love to meet deadlines, which means Election Day. It means that we're virtually not going to have any more deadlines for voter registration and voting. So if you move from Seattle to Tacoma 5 days before the election or on Election Day, you can walk in, change your registration, and get a ballot. It's a great convenience for voters, and it means that provisional balloting is going to go way, way down, if not disappear, which is a good thing. Because if you stand in line to get a provisional ballot, if you've spent the time doing that, I'd rather just count your ballot than give you a provisional one, right? What's making this possible is a new statewide voter registration system called VoteWA that is going to unify all 39 counties so that I'll be able to see in near real time, I'll be able to check in with Cowlitz County and make sure that you are not registered there anymore or cancel that, or that you haven't been issued a ballot before I register you and issue you your ballot and count it. So that new system is going to make same-day registration possible. The legislature passed it. They didn't provide any funding for it.
Of course.
And for Pierce County, what that translates to, again, based on what we know about voter behavior, is in 2020, about 1% of the voting population is going to show up in person on Election Day, either to register and vote or because they're confused and think we have polling places. That means we're going to have 34 workstations to accommodate that, assuming that there's a 7-minute transaction time and assuming that I don't want anybody to stand in line for more than an hour, which for me is a minimum and something I don't even want to approach. But given those standards, 7-minute transaction time, 1 hour wait, we're going to need to have 34 different workstations, which is a computer, a label maker, a printer, and a scanner. And I think we're going to have to rent the exhibition hall at the Tacoma Dome. And in fact, we're in negotiations right now. Because we don't want huge lines, and the facility that we have right now is just way too small, inadequate parking, not terrific ADA access. We want voters to be comfortable in 2020 with those big crowds, and we want to accommodate people, which means we're going to need to rent a big space.
Wow. Interesting.
It's going to be fun. It's going to be a lot of fun.
And I think you did cover the concern that I'm guessing popped into people's heads, which is, I think, fair.
Oh, absolutely.
About same-day voter registration, because you said, I'm going to drive from Seattle where I've cast my ballot, and
Right.
you're going to come down to Tacoma and
Right.
register to vote here.
Right.
But if they've already cast their ballot in King County, that will show up.
That will show up in the newly unified election management system. And I'm not going to issue you a ballot if you've already cast one in King County. So election workers are in a variety of work groups right now with the Secretary of State, working out all of the rules, every imaginable scenario, making sure that we have rules built into the election management system and voter registration system to prevent fraud and to make things go really smoothly. And we're excited about it.
Yeah, I mean, it is kind of the next evolution. And again, it's one of those things that's possible because of technology. You couldn't have done this
Absolutely not.
at all if we were back to having 39 different systems on, somebody's on a Windows 95 computer and this guy's on a Mac. And you couldn't have done it.
And that they don't talk to each
Right,
other.
yeah.
And all of that has to be done securely.
Right.
If there has been a watchword in 2018, it's been cybersecurity. So building a system that has near real-time visibility for all election administrators, but is state-of-the-art secure, is quite a trick. But I think we're going to pull it off.
Okay, and so this is next year that this goes into effect.
It goes into effect in June 2019, so we have a practice year, if you will, on local elections, and then we jump right into what will be, I think, the biggest election in American history.
Right, in 2020. So, okay, that's a lot on elections, and it's important, and it's in the news, but your office does some other stuff, and I know you well enough. You were on the Tacoma City Council many years ago and helped the city rewrite its animal control code.
Yeah.
I know how important animals are to you, and you wound up in the county with the job that has to deal with animals again.
Yeah. It's either karma or I did that on purpose, because I'm one of two county auditors in Washington State that has animal control in my bag of duties. I get to play city manager, if you will. I get to rent officers from the sheriff's department and equip them, train them, and direct the program to cover 1,600 square miles. In Pierce County, it's not just dogs and cats, and that's, I think, one of the things that makes it really interesting. We have a lot of large animals and agricultural animals that are subjected to cruelty or neglect, or they're loose and roaming. So we've been overrun with pigs and hogs in 2018, and you laugh, but you just try to load a 2-ton hog into a trailer.
Is there some reason why hogs are the animal of 2018?
I don't think it's the Chinese year of the pig. No, that's not it. I think it's just random chance.
Wow.
Just random chance.
Well, it wasn't just dogs and cats when you were on the Tacoma City Council. You banned people owning roosters when you were on the Tacoma City Council.
The animal nuisance noise, yeah, and we deal with animal nuisance noise in Pierce County as well. It's actually a pretty serious subject because as Pierce County starts to become more and more urbanized, people are moving next to large farms and small farms, and I don't know why, but they're suddenly surprised after they buy their house that there's roosters crowing next to them. And then they end up plaguing animal control with animal noise nuisance calls. And then, but Pierce County also has a countervailing policy and code about protecting farmland.
Right.
And animal control is kind of stuck in the middle. Just one of many things that makes the job interesting. In addition to just the exotic animals, animal breeding, a lot of dangerous animals. We've been in the news far more than we wanted to, responding to animal attacks that have severely crippled or killed people and other animals. So it's serious business in addition to the fun stuff like loose wallabies and how do you catch an emu and things like that.
Did you actually have those? I mean, those are real examples.
Those are real examples.
A loose wallaby.
Yes.
In Pierce County.
Yes, a couple of different times, and not the same one.
Not the same one. And how about pythons? Any your officers ever had encountered a giant snake of some kind?
2 weeks ago, we had a python in the office, and it was a Big Mama. Fortunately, we have, we've got great animal control officers, and our supervisor, Brian in particular, loves reptiles. So anytime there's a snake call, he drops everything to go out in the field and get that snake because he just loves them. So he gets to bring in, he'll do show and tell with us too. Yeah. And by the way, where do we take those animals? We don't take them to the Humane Society. We work with a variety of wildlife rescues and specialty rescues that'll take the exotics. Right. And the wallabies had homes. They were just loose. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I was going to ask, the thing to remind people of a little reason why both the city and the county had to get into animal control back when those days was because the Humane Society used to do that work and then decided it just wanted to be a shelter.
Correct.
So both the city and the county and other cities in Pierce County had to step up in getting into what is traditionally in other places a civic responsibility of doing animal control.
Right, and we're still reaping the consequences of that. I believe that we had something like 2 months' notice to figure out how local government was going to provide animal control and animal licensing. So decisions were made pretty hastily, and I wish that we had had more time because I think local government would have been better served by uniform animal control provided by one agency across the county. As it is, we've got 7 different animal control jurisdictions, and citizens don't know who to call, and they're still calling the Humane Society, clogging up their phone lines, taking away from their work. No doubt, and Pierce County has a live dispatch, so we actually answer the phone for animal control calls, but close to 30% of the calls that we get are actually citizens of the city of Tacoma, and they call us, and then we end up having to redirect them. So I wish that local government had had more time to be more thoughtful for a more consistent, standardized system that would have better benefited citizens. And I'd like to get that done before I leave office, quite frankly. And I joke that it's my plan for world domination, but I don't care who does it, but somebody needs to do it, and the citizens deserve it.
Well, I guess we should talk about that because amongst those many things on the ballot that people got to vote on, if they bothered to vote because you didn't have an opponent, but was your reelection to a third term as the Pierce County Auditor.
Yeah. And there was no write-in campaign either. In 2018, another election law that got changed was the laws about write-in candidates. We no longer have to tally votes for Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck. The new law is that if you want to be counted as a write-in candidate, you have to declare your candidacy. You have right up until 8 o'clock on election day to declare your candidacy. But if you haven't declared, then we're not going to be tallying votes for you. And that's going to prevent some real accidents that happened in other counties, like unwilling people. There was a sheriff in one county who was accidentally elected to office because it was a small county and he was a popular sheriff. He retired, and the road crew went out for beer and filled in their ballots, and they all wrote him in, and he ended up getting elected. That's not the way we want to elect people, and he didn't want to be elected. So this new write-in law it means that we're only doing write-in elections for people who want the job and have taken the time to identify who they are so that we can count the votes properly. And nobody launched a write-in campaign against me. So,
well, and with that, we are out of time for this episode.
Thanks, Randy.
Thank you for being here. Our guest has been Pierce County Auditor Julie Anderson. We look forward to seeing you next time here on Inside Tacoma.